In the quiet dance between desire and influence lies a truth so deep it's been hiding in plain sight for generations. What if I told you that the most brilliant minds, from Jung to contemporary neuroscience, have revealed a precise mechanism for creating unwavering devotion? And it doesn't rely on words or gestures, but on pure presence. This isn't about deceit, it's about learning the language of energy. Grasping the unseen currents that determine how people feel you, react to you, and attach to you. The Stoics called it logos, a hidden force within that, when centered, can influence without a single word. Ever wonder why certain people enter a room and command respect before they even speak? It's not mere confidence or surface charisma, it's deeper. It's a kind of inner stillness that speaks directly to the most guarded part of others. They don't chase connection, they become the gravity that draws it. And that's not luck, it's intention. A discipline of being, it's a subtle force, louder than voice. Stay with me. What I'm about to share isn't just psychology. It's a pathway, a method to speak directly to the ego, not by manipulating it, but by meeting it in silent power. A wisdom the Stoics held dear, a power rooted in stillness, not reaction. And if these words resonate with a truth inside you, one that longs for depth, growth, and philosophical clarity, consider joining this journey, because even the smallest commitment, like subscribing, helps us spread this message further. It tells the algorithm and your own soul that you're walking this road with intention. Why does rejection cut so deep? It's not the loss of the thing itself, it's the loss of feeling valued in someone else's eyes. That pain in your chest when they look through you, when they don't reciprocate, it's not logic, it's the ego. The part of you that longs to be acknowledged, to be understood. And when that part feels invisible, it doesn't just feel slighted, it feels shattered. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But that tragedy doesn't end at family. It's in every relationship where a person's true self is never seen. The ego doesn't crave praise. It craves meaning. It wants to matter, to feel like its existence leaves a mark in another human's eyes. So when you're overlooked, it's not a social error, it's an existential wound. A voice in the back of your mind whispers, "You weren't enough." But if rejection strikes the ego, what heals it? Not empty flattery, not vague praise. True healing comes from being seen. Not in the bathroom mirror, but in the depth of someone's gaze, someone who sees something in you that you yourself haven't fully met yet. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But sometimes you need another to hold that mirror before you can truly see. When someone tells you you're good, it's nice. But when they say, "I see something greater in you," it pierces. A flame ignites, because that comment doesn't just flatter, it summons. And in that summoning, the ego isn't soothed, it's awakened. That's where real influence starts, not through volume or convincing, but through presence, energy, the gap between who they think they are and who you gently reflect they could become. Plato once said, "We can easily forgive a child afraid of the dark. The real tragedy is when grown men fear the light." And sometimes, all it takes to illuminate that light is a look, a silence, a presence that whispers, "I see you." That's not control. It's clarity. And when clarity is wrapped in restraint, it draws people in, not to perform for them, but to feel themselves. People aren't pulled to those who plead. They're drawn to those who hold their posture, who let silence say what words cannot, who know that stillness is a language. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing." And in that space of not needing to prove, you offer others a rare gift, the space to find themselves. And that's where the ego begins to listen, not when it's attacked, but when it's challenged, when it feels mystery, not manipulation, but grounded mystery, a vibe that holds back just enough to make them curious. We live in a world obsessed with instant validation. So when you hold something sacred, your energy, your story, it stands out. Your boundaries become beacons. Your silence becomes a signal. So next time you feel ignored or underestimated, ask yourself, what am I mirroring? Neediness or completeness? Because that's centered stillness. That's the voiceless language of power. The ego doesn't respond to noise. It responds to substance. And when you stand in truth, seeing others not just for who they are, but for who they're hiding, you speak to a deep, hungry place in them, a place that craves meaning, not just comfort. Plato once said that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, isn't a single act. It's a habit, and those rare individuals who speak to your ego without ever speaking are the ones who make you want to develop that habit of excellence. Not to earn their praise, but to align with the stronger, wiser version of yourself that you glimpse in their presence. That's the line between momentary motivation and true transformation. There's a world of difference between someone who tells you you're doing well and someone who looks at you with calm, unwavering stillness. A look that gently implies, you could do more. One lifts your spirit. The other shifts your identity. Because deep down, we know where we're hiding, where we're shrinking our potential. And when someone sees through that without trying to fix you, the ego doesn't collapse. It expands. That's the beauty of sacred tension. It doesn't force. It doesn't flatter. It simply holds. And within that holding, you begin to grow, not to impress, but to awaken. Socrates once said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And in the presence of someone who refuses to offer easy comfort, you begin to sense that new, like a whisper inside you. Not because they said anything, but because their stillness made your inner noise impossible to ignore. This is what it means to speak to the ego without words. Not by filling the air with compliments, but by letting the silence hold a mirror. And in that reflection, real transformation starts, not with talking, but with seeing. But where does this kind of power originate? The ability to awaken someone's ego just by existing a certain way. It doesn't begin with tactics. It starts with your own self-perception. Before you can reflect meaning to another, you must first stare into your own mirror and ask, am I still performing for approval, or am I grounded in who I am? If you're still shaping your voice to be liked, still dulling your edge to avoid tension, still waiting for others to define your worth, then the energy you transmit will always be unclear, and unclear energy doesn't stir anyone. The presence that touches people deeply is born from an inner stability that needs nothing from others to feel whole. The ego, yours or theirs, doesn't respond to pleasing. It doesn't even respond to praise. It responds to presence. And presence is rare. Most people don't even know they're missing it until they sense it in someone else. And here's the paradox. Presence isn't loud. It's not showy. It's not desperate to be seen. It's a quiet power that stays centered when judged and doesn't grow louder when applauded. It just is. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And yet, when you do that, when you no longer haggle for your worth in every room you enter, you begin to radiate a different frequency. Not heaviness, but gravity. And people feel it. They don't always know why, but they pause, they think, and most of all, they feel the parts of themselves they've been ignoring. This is where your power begins, not from being more than others, but from being in alignment with yourself. When you enter a space not with ego, not with a need to be heard, but with inner stillness, the egos around you start to notice. Not because you're loud, but because your calm reveals their restlessness, the parts of them that rely on validation. Start to wonder why you don't. The parts that seek approval begin to question your freedom from it. That's the silent power of being rooted. It speaks before you do. It creates a presence, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that inspires people to rise, to meet you on that level, to deserve a place in the space you don't freely offer, not out of games or ego, but out of self-respect. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And the deeper you go into that self-knowledge, the less you need to see yourself reflected in other people's opinions. You no longer depend on being noticed to feel real. And ironically, that's when others start to truly see you. So when someone's ego starts to stir around you, when they begin explaining themselves more, leaning in without understanding why, it's not because you said something sharp. It's because you didn't flinch. You didn't need anything. And that stillness, that grounded energy, awakened something in them that had been asleep. That's where quiet power begins, in the depth of your commitment to belong fully to yourself. Let's talk about what this actually looks like. It's one thing to understand silent influence. It's another to embody it. Every movement you make, every pause, every breath either reinforces your inner stability or reveals a hunger for validation, and others feel that, even if they don't know they do. Your eyes, for example, they're not just windows to your soul. They're indicators of your self-possession. When your gaze is calm, grounded, not pushing or pulling, you signal that you're fully present. You're not chasing approval or analyzing their reaction. You're just here, comfortable with what you see and unafraid to be seen. But eyes that dart, that flicker or avoid, they suggest inner noise. They suggest a self that isn't fully centered, and the ego across from you will pick up on that immediately. And then there's silence. Most people fill silence out of fear, but those who let it breathe communicate something stronger, not dominance, but grounded presence. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." When you're comfortable letting a moment settle without jumping to fill it, you show you're not performing, you're being, and that is rare. Think about your boundaries, not what you post online, but what you actually enforce. Do you give your presence away easily? Or do people sense that being around you is something earned, not through games, but because your attention is intentional? When you treat your presence as sacred, others begin to treat it that way too. Every one of these silent signals speaks directly to the ego in front of you, because the ego is always watching. It's always asking, do I matter to you? Am I being seen? Should I try harder? And when your body calmly says, I see you, but I need nothing from you, something inside them stirs. Not in offense, but in curiosity. And that curiosity, that's where your power begins. Not to control, but to guide the interaction to a more authentic place. When the ego feels slightly unsettled, not judged, but awakened, it opens. And that's when connection becomes real. Not with their mask, but with what's underneath it. Socrates said, to live with honor is to be in reality what we appear to be. When your inner truth matches your outer signal, you become magnetic. Not because you chased attention, but because you carried something most people aren't used to holding, honesty. That's how you speak to the ego without raising your voice. Not through declarations, but through consistency. Quiet, unapologetic, clear. But be careful. Influence without intention becomes manipulation, and power without purpose turns into control. So ask yourself, what exactly do you want to awaken? In them, yes, but also in yourself, in the space between you. This isn't about obsession or tactics. It's about evolution. It's about creating a presence that activates others, not for your gain, but for their growth. Plato once wrote that, the highest form of knowledge is empathy, And real empathy isn't giving everything away. It's holding space for what someone could become. And that takes restraint. The restraint to let silence speak for you. The restraint to withhold over-explaining. The restraint to let them find their own reflection in the space between your words. The most powerful message isn't, "I believe in you." It's, "I believe in you and I won't prove it for you." That's not cold. That's clarity. And for the right person, that's transformative. Carl Jung said, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." True wisdom in relationships is knowing when to speak and when to stand still. The deepest form of respect is often shown in what you don't do. You don't fix, you don't save, you don't overstep. You simply stand, firm, clear, present. And in that stillness, you say, "I see who you are and who you could become." Not with demands, but with reflection. Most people flatter the light or fear the shadow. But when you hold both, without distortion, you become a mirror worth looking into. And that mirror makes people rise, not because you told them to, but because something inside them remembered how. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. And when your presence calls people to excellence, without saying a word, that's not manipulation, that's maturity. Real restraint isn't a strategy. It's a form of trust. Trust that silence has a message and that the space you leave might be exactly where they find themselves. The ego isn't evil. It's wounded. It's been shaped by a lifetime of not feeling enough. But when you meet it, not to fix, not to flatter, but to respect, everything shifts. You become someone who doesn't impress or intimidate, but activates. You stir what's been sleeping. You create tension, not for power, but for potential. And that tension is what makes you unforgettable, not for what you said, but for what you awakened. Real presence can't be faked. It's born in silence, built in self-mastery, and carried without effort. Plato said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." And that's where this journey begins, not with others, but with you. If today's message stirred something within, don't run from it. Let it deepen. Watch another video on screen. Thank you for being here with Stoic Journal, where stillness becomes strength and insight becomes action. Stay grounded, stay honest, and let your silence speak.